This report, A Place for Pride, was funded by the Pears Foundation, who are a social action charity, and we were interested in two key questions. One, are British people patriotic? Are British people proud of things other than those things that are just to do with them, so their community, their country, etc.? And secondly, does it matter? There's a lot of debate about whether or not patriotism is dying in Britain, about whether it matters that it's dying, and we wanted to get to the heart of whether or not being patriotic actually has any discernible effect for good or for ill on your behaviour.
This is now the modern debate about what one might call liberal nationalism or patriotism is now several years old. I suppose one might mark its start with Gordon Brown's slightly cat-handed Britishness debate. Indeed, one might see this as partly an answer, or a critique and an answer to Gordon Brown's Britishness.
I think we've sort of got to get away from a certain grammatical construction that says, I am a patriot, she is a nationalist, they are fascists, you know, where those more or less mean the same things. And I think we've also got to reconceptualise patriotism. I'm really genuinely thinking about at the moment developing a concept of matriotism. Britannia is a woman. It's been extremely male gender-coded, and I think that many of the great virtues of England and of Britain are to be found by bringing in much more of the female virtues into the public realm, and that's to do with kindness, and that's to do with manners, that's to do with care for others.
The report, which is based on a poll of 2,000 British people in a series of focus groups that we ran throughout the last year, finds that there is a strong level of natural felt pride in Britain amongst British people. The kind of obituary of Britishness is often written and has always been wrong in the past, and I think it's still wrong now. But interestingly, some of the more traditional kind of cleavages of patriotism, things like the Queen, Buckingham Palace, the Union flag, these have much less resonance with British people today than perhaps they once did. And in a funny kind of way are alienating British people from a British identity or a sense of patriotism. So very often when you say to people, are you patriotic? They say, no, not really, because in their head, what they're thinking patriotic is seeing Jerusalem at the last night of the proms. But when you ask them about how they feel about Britain, they actually have a huge level of affection and pride and love for their country.
This is the lessons of Brown. There's no point trying to make people feel good about things they feel bad about. We've got to be good. And the only way that there can be a meaningful patriotism is with a democratic renewal of the civic life, that it is political. And it does resolve back to people's identity and our identity as being a stubborn and open people, stubborn in our commitment to not being bossed around. It's going to have to, and having democratic forms of resisting that. And so roughly that would be, there is certainly a place for pride, but patriotism can also be expressed in the shame that you feel about the degeneration. And I think that the reality is that we are in a corrupt and degenerate political place in many ways, and that what we need is a narrative of renewal.
It adopts the strategy of denouncing both the left and the right and defining its own position as being different from the left and the right. So the left under Gordon Brown had tried to enlist patriotic sentiment in support of a progressive agenda, more welfare state, for example. But the most scathing criticism, it seems to me, was reserved for what they called the right, especially the linking of patriotism to history.
I would say that whilst all of those institutions scored reasonably well when you kind of added together the very proud, etc., to kind of divide it into positive or negative. I mean, only 33% of people were very proud, for instance, of British history. Only 33% of people were very proud of the royal family. And I suppose we're having an argument about how much weight you put on it. And it's not that I want us to abandon any of those things. I don't think it's about cutting them off as sources of pride, but I do think there's a sizable population of people in this country who are very attached to their British identity, but who find it very difficult to articulate that identity through those symbols, through a historic narrative, which is quite conditional. So your historic narrative places the emphasis on our struggle against tyranny and our march towards freedom and liberty, and other people's historic narratives of what Britain is and what Britain's done are different. And I think that for a lot of people, kind of intellectualizing it through the prism of look at what we have done does two things. First of all, it makes it very easy to rip asunder your patriotism because, frankly, all someone needs to come along and tell you is an alternative narrative of look at what we have done. But secondly, it also holds up, and perhaps this is what Morris would like it to do, but a mirror to who we are now in a way that can make people feel that we're not at a great moment of history, and the attachment, the living bond to country and to nation and to feeling patriotic about Great Britain becomes harder if you're viewing it through the prism of all of the magnificent things, the defeat of fascism, the abolition of slavery, etc., that our forefathers might have achieved.
Well, thank you very much indeed, everybody, for coming, and in particular to Max and David. So thank you very much.